Tonight, dear friend, we travel back in time to the broad and gentle waters of the Mississippi River. Before towering steel bridges connected distant shores, ordinary ferrymen quietly guided people, wagons, horses, and dreams across America's greatest river. As the morning mist drifts over the calm current and the soft creak of wooden planks echoes beneath your feet, you'll step into the peaceful rhythm of a forgotten life shaped by flowing water, changing seasons, and endless crossings. Before the first crossing. Tonight, dear friend, we travel back in time to the wide and quietly flowing Mississippi River, where the day begins long before the first traveler arrives. Before towering bridges stretched from bank to bank, before engines hummed across concrete highways, there were humble ferries guided by steady hands and patient hearts. As you settle into a comfortable place, let your breathing slow with the gentle rhythm of the river. Imagine cool morning air brushing against your face, the scent of damp earth rising from the shoreline, and the soft murmur of moving water welcoming another ordinary day in the year 1885. The world around you is still wrapped in darkness. Above the river, thousands of stars linger for a few moments longer, their reflections trembling across the slow current like scattered lanterns floating beneath the night sky. A pale ribbon of mist drifts silently over the water, hiding distant trees and softening every outline along the opposite shore. Nothing seems hurried here. Even time itself appears to move at the pace of the Mississippi. Nestled beneath a cluster of towering cottonwood trees stands a modest wooden cabin. Built from rough-hewn planks weathered by countless seasons, it rests only a short walk from the ferry landing. A thin trail of smoke curls from its stone chimney, carrying with it the comforting smell of burning oak and hickory. Inside, the ferryman is already awake. He is awakened this early nearly every morning for longer than most neighbors can remember. No clock hangs upon his wall. None is needed. Years beside the river have taught him to measure time by sounds that few others even notice. The distant call of an owl fading into silence. The first chorus of tree frogs growing quieter. The faint rustling of leaves stirred by the river breeze. These quiet companions have become his morning bell. He slowly pushes aside the heavy wool blanket covering his bed. The wooden floor beneath his feet feels cool after the night's gentle temperatures. A small iron stove glows softly in one corner of the room, its fading embers still offering a little warmth before another fire must be built. His cabin is simple. A sturdy table rests beside the window. A pair of handmade chairs sit nearby. Shelves hold neatly folded blankets, well-used tools, and carefully repaired lanterns whose brass surfaces catch the dim orange glow of the fire. Nothing inside has been chosen for decoration alone. Everything has a purpose. Everything has earned its place. The ferryman quietly dresses in sturdy work clothes made from thick cotton and wool. His trousers have been patched many times, though each repair has been sewn with remarkable care. Strong leather boots, polished more by years of walking than by any brush, wait beside the door. A broad-brimmed felt hat hangs from a wooden peg, ready to shield him from blazing summer sunshine, unexpected rain, or drifting snow depending on the season. Before stepping outside, he prepares a modest breakfast. A black iron kettle already hangs above fresh flames dancing inside the stove. Soon the cabin fills with the rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee. Beside it, a small skillet warms yesterday's cornbread while slices of salt pork slowly begin to sizzle. The gentle crackling fills the quiet room without disturbing its peaceful mood. There is no rush. The river rewards patience. He eats slowly, listening as the cabin itself seems to awaken. Wood gently settles after the cool night. Wind brushes softly against the walls. Somewhere beyond the window, a whip-poor-will offers one final evening call before surrendering the sky to morning birds. Breakfast finished, He washes the dishes in a small basin, dries them carefully, and places each one exactly where it belongs. Such routines may seem ordinary, yet they bring a comforting order to every day. Long before sunrise, these familiar tasks prepare not only the body for work, but also the mind. Finally, he reaches for a polished brass lantern. Its warm flame flickers gently behind clean glass. Opening the cabin door, he steps into the cool morning darkness. Fresh river air immediately greets him. It carries the unmistakable scent of wet wood, muddy banks, growing reeds, and distant forests still wrapped in mist. Above him, countless leaves whisper softly together while unseen insects continue their endless nighttime songs. A narrow footpath winds gently downhill toward the ferry landing. Each step has become familiar through thousands of mornings. Tree roots rise across the trail. Smooth stones mark the places where spring rains often wash away loose soil. Wildflowers bloom along the edges during warmer months, while fallen leaves gather there in autumn like colorful blankets spread beneath ancient trees. The lantern's golden light dances across the ground, revealing tiny details often overlooked during daylight. Spider webs shimmer with beads of dew. Ferns glisten beside old tree stumps. Small rabbits pause for only a heartbeat before disappearing silently into the undergrowth. As the ferryman reaches the riverbank, the Mississippi stretches before him like an endless ribbon of silver. Even in darkness, its immense size inspires quiet respect. The opposite shore can barely be seen through drifting mist. Occasionally, a faint lantern glows somewhere across the water, marking another farmhouse preparing for morning. Nearby rests the ferry itself. It is not a grand vessel. There are no towering smokestacks, no polished brass whistles, no elegant passenger cabins. Instead, it is a broad, sturdy wooden ferry boat built for dependable work. Heavy oak planks form its flat deck. Thick ropes secure it firmly to stout wooden posts driven deep into the riverbank. Every board bears scratches from wagon wheels, horseshoes, and decades of faithful service. The ferryman walks slowly around the vessel before every working day. He gently places one hand upon the weathered railing. The wood feels cool beneath his fingers. Years of sun, rain, ice, and countless crossings have given the timber a smooth surface unlike freshly cut lumber. Every groove tells a story that only the river remembers. His inspection follows the same careful order every morning. First, he checks each mooring rope. Strong hemp fibers must remain dry enough to hold firmly, yet flexible enough to handle changing river levels. Next come the deck planks. He notices even the smallest loose peg. A single weakened board might become dangerous beneath the weight of horses or loaded wagons. Finally, he examines the long guide cable stretching across the river. This heavy cable serves as the ferry's invisible road, helping guide safe crossings regardless of shifting currents below. Everything appears exactly as it should. Satisfied, he lowers the lantern onto a nearby wooden post. For a few peaceful moments, he simply stands and listens. The river speaks in quiet voices. Gentle waves brush softly against the ferry's hull. Water laps against moss-covered pilings. Far upstream, perhaps hidden beyond morning fog, a fish leaps briefly above the surface before disappearing once again beneath the calm current. The first robin begins to sing. Soon another answers. Then dozens more. Morning arrives not all at once, but bird by bird. The eastern horizon slowly changes from deep blue to soft lavender. Thin streaks of pale gold appear above distant forests. Mist floating above the Mississippi begins to glow as though lit from within. Light returns gently, never suddenly. As dawn quietly unfolds across America's greatest river, the ferryman knows that before long the first travelers will appear along the dusty road, bringing with them horses, wagons, baskets, conversations, and another day of ordinary lives connected by this simple wooden ferry. But for now, the river still belongs to silence. The river comes alive. The first rays of sunlight spread quietly across the broad Mississippi, turning the drifting mist into ribbons of glowing gold. Shadows begin to retreat beneath the towering cottonwood trees, while the gentle current catches the morning light like countless tiny pieces of polished glass. The river, silent only moments before, slowly begins another ordinary day that will connect neighbors, strangers, families, and wandering travelers from one shore to the other. The ferryman remains standing beside his boat, his broad hat pulled low against the growing brightness. There is still no hurry in his movements. Years spent beside the river have taught him that every day begins slowly, almost politely. Even the busiest mornings first offer a few peaceful moments before the steady rhythm of work quietly unfolds. Nearby, the damp grass sparkles beneath countless drops of dew. Tiny spider webs stretch between reeds along the shoreline, each one decorated with beads of moisture that glimmer like strings of pearls. A gentle breeze carries the fresh scent of river water mixed with rich black soil, wild mint growing along the bank, and distant hardwood forests awakening beneath the warming sky. The ferryman kneels beside the landing and dips one weathered hand into the river. The water feels cool enough to remind him that spring has only recently settled across the valley. He studies the current for several moments without speaking. Most people see only moving water, but a ferryman learns to notice countless small details hidden within its surface. A line of tiny ripples may reveal an underwater sandbar. A slow whirlpool near the shore hints at changing currents. Floating branches carried downstream tell stories about storms that may have passed many miles away during the night. These quiet observations guide nearly every decision he makes throughout the day. Long before modern instruments or detailed forecasts, the river itself became his teacher. A soft crunch of gravel breaks the morning silence. Farther up the winding road, the day's first traveler slowly appears through the remaining mist. It is an elderly farmer driving a sturdy wagon pulled by two patient draft horses. Their broad shoulders rise and fall with every steady step, leather harnesses creaking softly as wooden wheels roll across the uneven road. The wagon carries several empty milk cans that gently rattle together whenever the wheels pass over small stones. The farmer raises one hand in greeting. "Morning." The ferryman smiles warmly beneath his gray beard. "Beautiful morning for crossing." "It surely is," the farmer replies, glancing toward the glowing river. "Calmer than yesterday. It should stay that way." Neither man feels any need to speak more. Silence between old neighbors is comfortable rather than awkward. The horses pause willingly at the edge of the landing while the ferryman lowers the sturdy loading ramp. Thick oak planks settle firmly onto the riverbank with a familiar wooden thump. Slowly, the team steps forward. Their heavy hooves echo across the ferry's deck. Each horse seems to know the routine almost as well as the ferryman himself. They stand quietly while the wagon rolls aboard, its iron-rimmed wheels leaving faint marks upon the weathered boards polished smooth by decades of similar journeys. Once everything is safely positioned, the ferryman secures the wagon with simple wooden chocks. Safety comes before speed. It always has. As the ropes are loosened, the ferry eases gently away from the shore. The river immediately welcomes it with slow, steady movement. There is no loud engine, no whistle, only the quiet splash of water against wood. Above them, a pair of great blue herons glide gracefully along the shoreline, their broad wings barely moving as they search the shallows for breakfast. Nearby, painted turtles stretch themselves upon half-submerged logs, warming their shells beneath the gentle morning sunshine. The crossing feels almost effortless. The Mississippi does most of the work. The ferryman simply understands how to work with the river instead of against it. He adjusts the guide cable with practiced confidence, allowing the current to help carry the broad ferry across while keeping it aligned with the opposite landing. The farmer watches with quiet admiration. "I've crossed this river for nearly 20 years, he says, "and I still don't understand how you make it look so easy." The ferryman chuckles softly. "The river does most of it." The farmer nods. "Still takes a man who knows her." Those simple words linger pleasantly in the morning air. For the ferryman, the Mississippi has never been something to conquer. It is something to understand. By the time they reach the opposite shore, the mist has almost disappeared entirely. Children can now be seen helping gather eggs outside a nearby farmhouse. Thin columns of smoke rise from chimneys. Somewhere beyond a grove of sycamore trees, a rooster proudly announces a sunrise everyone already knows has arrived. The farmer thanks him, tips his hat once again, and continues toward town. Before long, another wagon appears waiting for the return trip. This one belongs to a young woman carrying baskets of freshly gathered vegetables destined for the weekly market. Bright green beans, early carrots, onions, and bundles of fragrant herbs fill the back of her wagon, their fresh scent blending pleasantly with the cool morning air. She is accompanied by her small daughter, perhaps no older than 7. The little girl gazes across the river with wide, curious eyes. "Is it always this big?" she quietly asks. Her mother smiles. "It always seems that way." The ferryman hears the question and gently replies, "And somehow, every season, it feels just a little different." The little girl looks thoughtfully toward the shimmering water. "What makes it different?" He points toward the distant shoreline. In spring, she carries melted snow from places we'll never see. Then toward a floating branch drifting slowly downstream. In summer, she reflects the bright blue sky. He smiles again. In autumn, she gathers golden leaves. "And in winter?" she asks almost in a whisper. "In winter," he answers softly, "she teaches patience." The child seems satisfied by the answer, though perhaps she understands only part of it. Sometimes wisdom grows slowly, just like rivers. The ferry glides onward once again. More travelers begin arriving with each passing hour. A blacksmith transporting freshly repaired wagon wheels. A young minister carrying well-worn books beneath one arm. A fisherman balancing neatly coiled nets over his shoulder. 2 brothers leading several sheep whose curious bleats drift gently across the calm water. Each passenger brings a different destination. Each crossing lasts only a short while. Yet together they create the quiet heartbeat of river life. The ferryman knows many by name. Others he recognizes simply by face. Some he may never see again. Still, every traveler receives the same steady smile, the same careful crossing, and the same quiet confidence that has earned the trust of 2 entire communities. By mid-morning, the sun hangs comfortably above the river, warming the wooden deck beneath everyone's feet. Dragonflies dart above the reeds in flashes of shimmering blue and green. Swallows swoop gracefully through the open air, catching insects that dance above the water's surface. The ferry continues its patient work, back and forth, again and again, never hurried, never idle. Its gentle rhythm has become as dependable as sunrise itself. Long before steel bridges stretched across the mighty Mississippi, this humble wooden ferry served as something far greater than a simple boat. It was a moving piece of the road itself, a quiet connection between neighbors, a trusted companion for ordinary lives. And as another wagon slowly approaches through the bright morning sunlight, the ferryman reaches once more for the heavy mooring rope, ready to begin yet another peaceful crossing across America's greatest river. Meeting the people of the river. The morning has now settled comfortably over the Mississippi River. The golden light that first touched the mist has grown warmer, reaching into every quiet corner of the shoreline. The water reflects broad patches of blue sky, broken only by the gentle wake of the ferry as it makes another unhurried crossing. Cottonwood leaves shimmer softly in the breeze, and somewhere high above, A bald eagle circles with slow, graceful confidence. The ferryman has already completed several crossings, yet the rhythm of his work never feels repetitive. Each journey across the river lasts only a few minutes, but no two are ever quite the same. The passengers change. The conversations change. Even the river itself seems to reveal a different personality with every passing hour. He has come to believe that no one truly crosses the Mississippi in exactly the same way twice. A light breeze carries the pleasant scent of freshly cut hay from fields beyond the eastern bank. Somewhere nearby, wild honeysuckle blooms along an old split-rail fence, filling the air with a gentle sweetness that blends naturally with the clean smell of flowing water. Another wagon approaches along the dusty road. Unlike the sturdy farm wagons that arrived earlier, this one is smaller and carefully painted. Its wheels have been freshly greased, allowing it to roll almost silently over the packed earth. Sitting upon the driver's bench is a young woman wearing a neatly pressed navy blue dress beneath a light gray traveling cloak. Beside her rests a small leather satchel, worn smooth from daily use. The ferryman smiles as soon as he recognizes her. "Good morning, Miss Harper." She returns the smile warmly. "Good morning, Mr. Collins." Miss Harper is the school teacher for the little one-room schoolhouse located several miles beyond the opposite shore. Every weekday morning, she crosses the river before sunrise to greet her students long before the first lesson begins. Her passengers are not horses or wagons. They are curious young minds. As her wagon rolls gently onto the ferry, she carefully lifts the leather satchel into her lap. Inside are several treasured books, neatly folded writing papers, a bottle of ink wrapped in cloth, and a polished brass handbell whose cheerful ring announces the beginning of each school day. The ferryman notices the familiar bell, still keeping everyone on time? She laughs softly. "I try." He nods toward the satchel. "And do they still ask more questions than you can answer?" "Oh," she replies with a smile, "every single day." The ferry slips quietly away from the landing. For a few peaceful moments neither speaks. Both simply watch the river. Miss Harper finally breaks the silence. "Sometimes I think my students learn nearly as much from crossing this river as they do inside the classroom." The ferryman glances toward the shimmering water. "The river teaches slowly and patiently." "Exactly!" She watches several ducks glide effortlessly along the shoreline. "They're always asking where the water comes from. And what do you tell them?" She smiles thoughtfully. "I tell them it has traveled farther than any of us ever will." The ferryman chuckles. "That's a fine answer." Children often imagine rivers as something that simply exists beside their homes. Adults eventually discover that rivers connect countless lives far beyond the places they know. As the ferry reaches the opposite bank, Miss Harper thanks him before continuing toward the little white schoolhouse whose bell tower rises gently above the surrounding prairie grasses. Soon after she disappears beyond a grove of oak trees, another familiar figure arrives. This time it is Reverend Thomas Walker. The elderly minister walks rather than rides, carrying only a worn leather Bible beneath one arm and a sturdy walking stick polished smooth by many years of faithful use. His black coat has faded slightly beneath countless seasons of sun and rain, but it remains carefully brushed and neatly buttoned. "Good morning," the ferryman says. "A beautiful morning the Lord has given us." "It surely is," the minister replies. The two men have shared hundreds of crossings together over the years, some filled with conversation, others spent entirely in comfortable silence. Today, the Reverend stands near the railing watching sunlight sparkle across the water. "I've always believed," he says quietly, "that rivers remind us not to cling too tightly to yesterday." The ferryman studies the slow current. "They never stop moving." "No, and yet they're always the same river." The ferryman nods thoughtfully. He has never considered the Mississippi in quite those words before. Perhaps that is one reason he enjoys carrying ministers across the river. They often leave him with peaceful thoughts that linger long after they have stepped ashore. As the Reverend disappears along the winding road, the ferry returns once again to its familiar route. By late morning, the landing grows busier. A livestock trader arrives leading 3 gentle mules whose long ears twitch curiously as they step onto the wooden deck. Behind them follows a young apprentice blacksmith transporting newly forged horseshoes wrapped carefully inside burlap sacks. Soon afterward, a cheerful fisherman appears carrying freshly repaired nets over one shoulder and 2 wicker baskets beneath the other arm. His face is deeply tanned from years beneath open skies. "River looks generous today," he says. "It usually is if you're patient." The fisherman grins. "Then we're both in the right line of work." The ferryman laughs quietly. Patience feeds them both. The crossing passes peacefully. The fisherman points toward a cluster of floating logs drifting downstream. Beavers were busy upstream. The ferryman follows his gaze. They certainly were. Small observations like these often become the entire conversation. Nothing more is needed. Life beside the Mississippi teaches people to notice simple things: the direction of the wind, the color of the clouds, the songs of different birds, the height of the river against old tree roots. Such details may seem ordinary to strangers. Here, they are part of everyday wisdom. Near midday, a covered wagon slowly approaches from the western road. Its canvas top is weathered by long travel, while dust coats nearly every wooden surface. A husband and wife sit upon the front bench with 2 sleepy children nestled between blankets in the back. Their faces reveal both weariness and quiet hope. The ferryman helps guide the wagon safely aboard. "Traveling far?" he asks. "To Missouri," the father replies. "We've heard there's good farmland." The ferryman nods kindly. "I hope you find exactly what you're looking for." The little boy peeks curiously over the side of the wagon. "Is this the biggest river in America?" The ferryman smiles. "For many folks, it certainly feels that way." The child stares in amazement as the broad river stretches toward distant forests. His younger sister watches dragonflies dancing above the reeds instead. Children often notice different wonders than adults. As the ferry reaches the opposite shore, the family thanks him sincerely before continuing their journey westward. The ferryman watches until their wagon disappears beyond rolling hills. He knows he will probably never see them again. Yet for a few quiet minutes, their lives crossed paths upon this river. The Mississippi has a remarkable way of bringing strangers together before gently carrying them onward toward different futures. The sun now stands high overhead, filling the valley with warm summer light. Swallows dart gracefully through the clear blue sky while turtles continue resting upon sunlit logs. Along the shoreline, willow branches dip lazily into the gentle current, their reflections swaying with every ripple. The ferry waits patiently at the landing once more. Another traveler is already approaching along the dusty road. Another story, another quiet conversation, another ordinary life connected by the broad and timeless waters of the Mississippi. And for the ferryman, there is no finer way to spend a day than helping one peaceful journey continue toward its destination. A midday rest along the riverbank. By the time the church bell in the nearby town quietly marks the approach of noon, the Mississippi has settled into its broad afternoon rhythm. The early morning mist has long since vanished, leaving behind an endless sky painted in soft shades of blue. Puffy white clouds drift lazily overhead, their reflections stretching across the slow-moving water before breaking gently against the ferry's wake. The sun now shines warmly, though not harshly. Its light filters through towering cottonwoods, creating dancing patches of shade across the landing where horses patiently wait beside wagons. Dragonflies continue their graceful flights above clusters of reeds, while the distant call of a mourning dove drifts peacefully across the valley. The ferryman completes another crossing before guiding the ferry gently against the landing posts. The thick hemp ropes tighten with a familiar creak. Passengers step ashore one by one. A merchant carrying bolts of cloth thanks him with a polite nod before continuing toward the village. Two sisters, each balancing woven baskets filled with fresh eggs beneath folded linen cloths, walk slowly along the shaded road while quietly discussing preparations for Sunday's family dinner. Soon the landing becomes wonderfully still. No wagons wait upon either shore. No horses stamp impatiently. Even the birds seem to pause during the warmest hour of the day. The ferryman smiles softly. It is time for his midday meal. Rather than returning to his cabin, he follows a narrow footpath that leads beneath several enormous sycamore trees, whose branches have shaded generations of river workers. Their trunks are thick enough that 3 grown men could scarcely reach around one together, their bark peeling naturally into pale patches of cream, gray, and brown. There, overlooking the water, stands a weathered wooden bench. No one remembers exactly who built it. Some say an earlier ferryman placed it there decades ago. Others believe it was constructed by grateful travelers. Either way, it has become a quiet companion through countless seasons. The ferryman settles onto the bench and removes a neatly wrapped cloth bundle from his leather satchel. Lunch is simple: a thick slice of homemade bread, sharp cheddar cheese, cold slices of smoked ham, a crisp apple picked only yesterday from a nearby orchard. Wrapped separately is a small jar containing fresh blackberry preserves prepared by a neighboring family earlier in the summer. There is nothing extravagant about the meal, yet every bite reflects the work of familiar hands. The bread came from the town baker, the cheese from a nearby dairy, the apples from trees planted many years before the Civil War. Even the cloth surrounding the meal was sewn carefully by his late wife many winters ago. As always, he unfolds it gently. Some possessions carry memories as faithfully as photographs. He begins eating slowly while watching sunlight shimmer across the river. A gentle breeze stirs the branches overhead. Leaves rustle together like quiet whispers exchanged between old friends. Some drift lazily downward, spinning gracefully before coming to rest upon the soft grass. Nearby, several squirrels chase one another along a fallen log before disappearing into the forest with remarkable speed. A pair of children suddenly appear farther along the shoreline, brother and sister, perhaps 8 and 10 years old. They carry homemade fishing poles fashioned from straight willow branches and patiently search the muddy bank for worms beneath flat stones. The ferryman watches them with an amused smile. Neither child seems interested in catching large fish. The adventure itself appears reward enough. Soon they settle near a quiet inlet where minnows sparkle beneath clear water. The younger sister gasps excitedly as a turtle slowly lifts its head above the surface before slipping silently back beneath the ripples. Her brother grins. "I told you they'd be here." The ferryman remembers days much like those from his own childhood. Long before he became responsible for carrying travelers safely across the Mississippi, he too spent afternoons exploring quiet riverbanks. He learned which trees bloomed first each spring, where wild berries ripened earliest, which birds arrived before summer, where catfish gathered after heavy rains. Much of his education came not from books, but from simply paying careful attention. The river had always been an excellent teacher. As he finishes his lunch, another familiar visitor quietly approaches. Old Mr. Jenkins. Few people know the river as well as he does. Now well into his 70s, Mr. Jenkins once piloted steamboats before retiring to a small farmhouse overlooking one of the Mississippi's gentle bends. His white beard reaches almost to the middle of his chest, while his weathered straw hat has protected him from countless summers beneath the open sky. Without saying a word, he sits beside the ferryman on the old bench. For several peaceful minutes they simply watch the water together. Neither feels the need to hurry conversation. Finally, Mr. Jenkins speaks. "River's dropping," the ferryman nods. "About 2 inches since last week. Means those sandbars will be showing themselves again." I noticed one beginning to appear just north of Miller's Bend. Mr. Jenkins smiles approvingly. "Good eye. Their words are few. Their understanding is deep. People who spend lifetimes beside great rivers often communicate through observations more than explanations. They notice changes others overlook, the shape of drifting logs, the direction of floating leaves, the color of distant clouds reflected upon the water. Each detail quietly reveals what tomorrow may bring." Mr. Jenkins reaches into his coat pocket and produces a small folded newspaper. "I heard they're talking about building another railroad farther west." The ferryman studies the paper without opening it. "The country's changing. It surely is." They both know that railroads are spreading across America with astonishing speed. Every year, new bridges stretch across rivers that once depended entirely upon ferries. Some river crossings have already disappeared forever. Yet neither man speaks with bitterness. Progress has always been part of American life. Still, they quietly wonder how many generations from now will remember these peaceful crossings beneath open skies. A gentle silence returns between them. Across the river, a distant steamboat appears around a wide bend. Its tall smokestacks send dark gray plumes drifting high into the afternoon air. Although still several miles away, its whistle echoes softly across the valley. Long, low, almost musical. The ferryman watches the vessel with genuine admiration. He has never considered steamboats to be rivals. The Mississippi is vast enough for every kind of traveler. Large steamboats connect distant cities. Small ferries connect neighboring lives. Both belong to the river. Mr. Jenkins rises slowly, brushing a few dry leaves from his trousers. "I'd best head home before Martha starts wondering where I've wandered." The ferryman laughs warmly. "Tell her I kept you talking." "Oh," the old riverman replies with a wink. "She'll know better than that." After he disappears beneath the shaded trail, the ferryman carefully folds the lunchcloth once more. He places every remaining crumb inside the bundle. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is left behind except a few footprints that tomorrow's breeze will quietly erase. Standing once again, he stretches his shoulders before walking back toward the landing. Already, another wagon is approaching from the eastern road. Behind it follows a pair of riders leading pack horses loaded with wooden barrels. The afternoon's work is about to begin. The Mississippi never truly sleeps during daylight. It simply pauses between one peaceful crossing and the next. The ferryman reaches for the familiar mooring rope, feeling its coarse hemp fibers against his calloused hands. The river glitters beneath the warm afternoon sun, ready to carry another small collection of ordinary lives safely from one shore to the other, just as it has done for generations. The ferry drifted away from the landing with a slow, familiar grace as the ferryman eased the heavy mooring rope free from the weathered post. The hemp slid through his calloused hands with a quiet rasp before dropping into its usual place along the deck. Another ordinary afternoon crossing had begun, just as hundreds had before it, and the broad Mississippi accepted the little ferry without hurry. The wagon rolled aboard first. Its wooden wheels bumped gently over the planks while the chestnut draft horse lowered its head with complete trust, already familiar with the slight movement beneath its hooves. The driver, a middle-aged co-opper from the neighboring town, carried several freshly made oak barrels stacked neatly in the wagon bed. The sweet scent of newly cut white oak drifted softly across the ferry whenever the breeze changed direction. Behind him came 2 young riders leading 3 sturdy pack horses. Each animal carried leather saddlebags bulging with supplies destined for farms scattered beyond the western bluffs. Carefully tied bundles of flour, lamp oil, sewing thread, coffee beans, and iron nails rested securely beneath canvas covers. Life along the river depended as much upon these quiet deliveries as upon the larger shipments carried by distant steamboats. The ferryman greeted every traveler with the same gentle warmth. "Afternoon." The co-opper tipped his broad hat. "Afternoon." One of the riders smiled. "Looks like the river's treating us kindly today. So far," the ferryman answered with an easy grin. The Mississippi always deserved respect. Even on its calmest days, no riverman ever forgot that peaceful water could change its mood with remarkable speed. He gave the ferry pole a careful push against the riverbed near shore before the current slowly claimed the vessel once more. The landing drifted behind them almost without notice. Cottonwood leaves shimmered in the afternoon sunlight while long grasses bent together beneath the warm southern breeze. No one aboard felt the need to rush conversation. Silence was never uncomfortable on the ferry. It was simply another companion of the river. One of the younger riders rested both arms upon the wooden railing while watching the water slide quietly past. "I've crossed this river dozens of times," he said after several peaceful moments, "but I still find myself staring at it." The ferryman nodded knowingly. "It never looks exactly the same twice." The young man considered that for a moment before looking back across the broad channel. "I suppose you're right." The sunlight danced differently upon every passing ripple. Cloud shadows wandered slowly across the water like enormous drifting sails. Even the color of the river changed from hour to hour, shifting gently between deep blue, muddy brown, and shimmering silver depending upon the sky above. No painting could ever capture it completely. Near the bow, one of the pack horses lifted its ears suddenly. From somewhere downstream came the distant laughter of children. A family had gathered beside a shallow sandbar where several youngsters splashed happily near the shoreline under the careful watch of their parents. Shoes rested in neat rows upon the grass, while picnic blankets lay beneath towering cottonwoods heavy with midsummer leaves. The ferryman smiled quietly. Summer afternoons had always drawn families toward the river. Long before parks became common, these gentle banks served as gathering places where neighbors shared food, music, and stories beneath open skies. A little farther downstream, another familiar sight appeared. Two fishermen worked patiently from a narrow wooden skiff anchored beside an overhanging willow tree. Their lines disappeared beneath the calm surface, while an old wicker basket already held several respectable catfish resting upon damp river reeds. Neither fisherman seemed disappointed by the slow pace. Fishing had never been only about filling a basket. Often it was simply another excuse to spend a peaceful afternoon beside the Mississippi. The ferry continued steadily onward. The rhythmic splash of water against its sturdy hull blended naturally with the soft creaking of seasoned timber. Every board beneath the passengers' feet had weathered countless seasons of rain, snow, summer heat, and spring floods. The ferry itself seemed almost alive, speaking quietly through familiar sounds understood only by those who spent their lives upon working boats. The co-opper gently rested one hand upon one of his finished barrels. "These are heading to a vineyard." The ferryman glanced toward the carefully crafted casks. "They'll hold wine before autumn, if the grapes behave." They both chuckled softly. Across 19th century America, nearly every occupation depended upon another. The co-opper relied upon lumbermen. The vineyard relied upon co-oppers. Farmers relied upon blacksmiths. Merchants relied upon ferrymen. Countless ordinary lives connected together almost invisibly, each supporting the next like links within a long chain stretching quietly across the growing nation. High overhead, a broad-winged hawk circled gracefully upon rising currents of warm air. Its shadow drifted slowly across the ferry deck before continuing toward the western hills. One of the riders followed its flight. "I wonder how far it'll travel today." The ferryman looked upward. "As far as the wind invites it," Simple answers often carried quiet wisdom. No one hurried to speak again. They merely listened. Somewhere among the reeds, a red-winged blackbird called repeatedly. Tree frogs answered from hidden pools along the shoreline. The gentle clink of harness buckles accompanied the slow breathing of patient horses. Together, the sounds formed the familiar afternoon music that every ferryman carried home each evening without even realizing it. About halfway across the channel, the ferryman's attention shifted almost instinctively toward a cluster of floating driftwood ahead. To an inexperienced eye, it appeared unremarkable, merely several weathered branches drifting with the current. But decades upon the river had trained him to notice subtle differences. One log rolled slightly beneath the surface, another turned against the direction of the current. Those tiny movements quietly revealed a shallow underwater snag where larger trees had lodged during the previous spring floods. He adjusted the ferry's angle only slightly. Most passengers never noticed. The vessel slipped safely past the hidden obstruction with barely a ripple. Quiet skill often appeared effortless. That was true of many old trades. Whether baking bread, repairing boots, guiding horses, or crossing rivers, years of experience allowed ordinary work to unfold so smoothly that others scarcely noticed the knowledge behind it. The opposite landing slowly grew larger. Children waiting beside a split-rail fence pointed excitedly toward the approaching ferry, while an elderly woman shaded her eyes beneath the brim of a faded bonnet. Beside her stood a young doctor holding a worn leather medical case, likely preparing to visit one of the isolated farms scattered across the countryside. The ferryman felt a familiar satisfaction. Every safe crossing connected lives that might otherwise remain separated. Letters reached distant families. Doctors reached waiting patients. Merchants reached customers. Grandparents embraced grandchildren. Friends met again after long weeks apart. His work rarely attracted headlines, yet it quietly stitched together the everyday fabric of river life. The ferry eased gently against the western landing with its usual soft bump. Before anyone moved, the ferryman secured the thick hemp rope around the stout wooden post, checking the knot with practiced hands. Only when everything stood perfectly still did he nod to his passengers. "You're clear." The horses stepped carefully onto solid ground. The wagon followed with its comforting rumble. One by one, the travelers continued along dusty country roads, disappearing beneath broad oak trees that had witnessed generations of similar afternoons. Within only a few minutes, the landing grew peaceful once more. The ferryman remained beside the railing for a quiet moment, watching tiny ripples slowly fade from the shoreline where the ferry had touched land. The river had carried another handful of ordinary people safely across its broad waters, asking for nothing more than patience, steady hands, and quiet respect in return. The quiet arrival of evening travelers. The last wagon disappeared beneath the shelter of the tall oak trees, leaving only a faint ribbon of dust drifting lazily above the country road. For a few peaceful moments, the western landing belonged entirely to the river once again. The ferryman rested one weathered hand upon the smooth wooden railing, allowing the quiet to settle around him. Afternoon was slowly beginning its gentle journey toward evening. The sunlight had softened almost without notice. Its bright midday brilliance now carried a mellow golden warmth that spread across the broad Mississippi like liquid honey. Every ripple reflected tiny flashes of amber before fading into deeper shades of blue farther from shore. The ferryman had learned long ago that every hour possessed its own personality. Morning belonged to beginnings. Noon belonged to steady work. Evening belonged to home. A pleasant breeze wandered across the water, carrying the fresh scent of river reeds mixed with warm earth, wild flowers, and distant wood smoke rising from farmhouses preparing the evening meal. Somewhere beyond the trees, someone had already begun splitting firewood for supper, each measured strike of an axe echoing softly through the quiet countryside. He loosened the mooring rope once again. The ferry drifted gently back toward midstream without a sound of urgency. There were still several hours of daylight remaining, and experience had taught him that the final crossings of the day often carried the most interesting collection of travelers. Families returning home, shopkeepers closing their businesses, children sleepy from long afternoons, neighbors carrying small purchases wrapped carefully in brown paper. The river served them all equally. As the ferry approached the eastern landing, a small gathering had already formed beneath the shade of several towering cottonwoods. A young mother stood beside a modest farm wagon while gently rocking a sleeping baby wrapped in a light cotton blanket. Beside her, two older boys quietly skipped smooth stones across the edge of the river, laughing softly each time one bounced farther than the last. Nearby, an elderly couple waited patiently beside a sturdy bay horse. The gentleman leaned comfortably upon a polished hickory walking stick while his wife adjusted the ribbons of her pale blue bonnet whenever the breeze lifted them. They looked in no hurry, neither did anyone else. Life along the Mississippi often moved according to the rhythm of nature rather than the ticking of distant clocks. The ferry touched the landing with its familiar wooden sigh. The ferryman secured the rope before offering the passengers a warm smile. "Good evening." The elderly gentleman tipped his hat. "And a fine one it is." His wife smiled kindly. "Looks like we'll have another beautiful sunset." "I believe we will." The two boys eagerly guided the family wagon aboard while their mother thanked the ferryman with a grateful nod. She apologized softly for the boys' excitement. "They've been talking about riding the ferry all week." The ferryman chuckled. "They're exactly the age to enjoy it." The younger boy looked up with wide eyes. "Have you crossed this river every day?" "For many years. Have you ever seen a river monster?" His older brother immediately laughed. "There aren't any river monsters." The ferryman smiled without dismissing the child's imagination. "I've seen enormous catfish." "How enormous?" "Large enough to make fishermen tell the same story for the next 20 years. Both boys burst into cheerful laughter. Their mother shook her head affectionately. "I suppose they'll be searching for giant catfish all summer now. There are worse adventures." The ferry eased quietly into the current once more. The sleeping baby never stirred. The soft rocking of the boat seemed almost designed for peaceful dreams. Many parents had discovered the same thing over the years. More than one restless child had fallen asleep before reaching the opposite shore. The ferryman often thought the Mississippi possessed a calming voice of its own. Its endless whisper against the hull never repeated exactly the same melody, yet somehow always sounded familiar. Halfway across the river, the elderly gentleman removed a small brass pocket watch from his waistcoat. Rather than checking the hour with urgency, he simply admired the fading sunlight glinting across its polished cover before returning it carefully to his pocket. "My father carried this watch through the war," he said quietly. The ferryman nodded respectfully. "It has kept good company. It has." For several moments neither man spoke. Some memories required no explanation. The gentle silence itself honored them. Above the western bluffs, several swallows darted gracefully through the evening air, catching insects with astonishing speed before wheeling together in perfect harmony. Their graceful flight reminded the ferryman how every season carried familiar visitors. Spring welcomed migrating birds. Summer filled the riverbanks with dragonflies and wildflowers. Autumn painted the forests with gold and crimson. Winter wrapped everything beneath peaceful frost. The river accepted every season without complaint. The younger of the two boys suddenly pointed toward the southern horizon. "Look! Far downstream, barely visible through the warm afternoon haze, a magnificent paddle-wheel steamboat rounded a distant bend. Its great paddle wheel turned steadily. White steam drifted high into the sky. The vessel appeared almost dreamlike against the glowing light. The older boy stared in amazement. "It's enormous!" "It certainly is," the ferryman replied. Have you ever wanted to work on one?" The question lingered gently in the air. The ferryman considered it honestly before answering. "When I was younger, perhaps. What changed?" He rested one hand upon the familiar railing. "I realized I already had everything I needed." The boys listened carefully. "This little ferry lets me know nearly everyone who crosses. I watch children grow into parents. I carry neighbors to weddings. I bring doctors to sick families. I watch every season arrive. A steamboat travels much farther. But this river crossing became my home." The elderly woman smiled warmly. "That sounds like a rich life." The ferryman looked quietly across the shimmering water. "I've always thought so." No one added anything further. The answer seemed complete. The ferry continued its steady journey while golden sunlight settled lower behind the distant hills. Long reflections stretched across the Mississippi until the entire river seemed woven from ribbons of glowing bronze. Even the horses stood unusually still, their ears gently twitching as evening birdsong replaced the louder chorus of afternoon. Soon the western landing drew near once more. Smoke rose peacefully from farmhouse chimneys. Somewhere beyond the trees, supper bells began ringing across scattered homesteads. The sound drifted softly through the valley, one bell answering another until the countryside itself seemed to breathe with quiet familiarity. The ferry touched the dock almost silently. Once again, the ferryman secured the thick hemp rope before helping the passengers step safely ashore. The younger boy paused before leaving. "Thank you," the ferryman smiled. "Perhaps I'll see you again before summer ends. I hope so." The family continued toward the dusty road leading home, their wagon gradually disappearing beneath the evening light. The ferryman remained standing for a moment, watching the golden dust settle behind their wheels. Across the broad Mississippi, the first hints of sunset had begun to color the western sky with soft shades of amber, rose, and lavender. Another peaceful chapter of the day was quietly unfolding, and with it would come a different kind of traveler. Those returning home beneath the calm glow of approaching dusk. Sunset crossings and familiar faces. The wagon carrying the young family slowly disappeared beneath the arching branches of ancient oak trees, their leaves glowing softly beneath the lowering sun. Before long, only the gentle creak of distant wheels remained, gradually blending into the peaceful sounds of the countryside. The ferryman stood quietly at the landing. Even after so many years, he never hurried the final hours of daylight. Evening possessed its own gentle rhythm. The busiest part of the day had already passed, yet these remaining crossings often became his favorites. Travelers returning home carried a different sort of energy than those setting out in the morning. Their conversation softened, their shoulders relaxed. Faces that had greeted the day with purpose now reflected quiet satisfaction after honest work. The Mississippi seemed to notice the change as well. The afternoon breeze had weakened, leaving the broad river smoother than polished glass. Gentle ripples spread lazily from the ferry's hull before disappearing into reflections of the glowing sky. He untied the familiar hemp rope once again. The ferry drifted naturally toward the eastern bank. As he approached, he noticed several familiar figures already waiting beneath the cottonwoods. The first was Mrs. Abigail Turner, the village postmistress. She was a widow in her early 60s, known throughout the county for her careful handwriting and remarkable memory. Few people could remember names and family connections as effortlessly as she could. Her dark traveling dress remained neat despite the long day's work, and beside her rested 2 sturdy canvas mail sacks tied securely with thick leather straps. The ferryman smiled warmly. "Evening, Mrs. Turner, and a peaceful evening to you." She returned the smile with the quiet confidence of someone who had crossed this river hundreds of times. "Another full day?" "The fullest since planting season." She gently patted one of the mailbags. Letters always seem heavier on Fridays. They carry people home in their own way. They certainly do. Soon another traveler arrived. A young schoolteacher named Miss Eleanor Brooks carefully guided her bay mare toward the landing. She taught at a one-room schoolhouse several miles beyond the western hills, and made this crossing nearly every weekday during the warmer months. Though still in her 20s, she carried herself with calm patience earned from managing nearly 30 children of every age inside a single classroom. A stack of worn lesson books rested inside her leather satchel. The ferryman tipped his hat. "School finished for the week?" She smiled with visible relief. "It has. And how did the scholars behave?" She laughed softly. "Better on Friday than they usually do on Monday," Mrs. Turner chuckled. "I believe that has always been true." The three shared an easy silence as the ferry settled gently against the dock. The horse stepped aboard with practiced confidence. The mail sacks followed. Within moments they were gliding quietly toward midstream once again. Golden sunlight poured across the Mississippi, transforming every gentle wave into liquid bronze. Far overhead, several great blue herons flew toward their evening nesting grounds with slow, steady wing beats. Their long silhouettes crossed the glowing sky before fading into the distant trees lining the western shore. The schoolteacher rested her hands lightly upon the railing. "I kept the children after lessons today." "For mischief?" asked the ferryman. "For stories," Mrs. Turner smiled knowingly. "Stories?" Miss Brooks nodded. "I asked each child to tell the class about someone older in their family. What happened?" They spoke about grandfathers who built barns, grandmothers who baked bread every Saturday. One little boy described how his father still sharpened his grandfather's axe. She looked thoughtfully across the river. I realized they weren't simply sharing stories. They were passing along history. The ferryman nodded quietly. "The kind worth remembering." Exactly. None of those stories would likely appear inside history books. No famous speeches, no great battles, no governors, no generals. Only ordinary people living ordinary lives. Yet together, those simple memories formed the true heart of every community. Mrs. Turner gently rested one hand upon the nearest mailbag. Letters do something similar. They preserve voices, sometimes years after they're written. She remembered delivering letters between brothers separated by the Civil War, young couples writing during long engagements, parents encouraging sons seeking work farther west, children sending clumsy birthday wishes to grandparents they seldom saw. Ink faded, paper yellowed, but affection remained. The ferryman often thought his ferry served much the same purpose. Instead of carrying written words, it quietly carried the people themselves. As they reached the center of the channel, the setting sun slipped beneath a thin veil of clouds. The entire western horizon bloomed into delicate shades of amber, peach, lavender, and soft crimson. Their reflections stretched across the river in shimmering ribbons that seemed almost too beautiful to disturb. No one aboard spoke. Even the horse remained remarkably still. Sometimes beauty invited silence more naturally than conversation. From somewhere downstream came the faint melody of a fiddle. The music drifted gently across the water, carried by the cool evening air. Though distant, the tune remained cheerful without disturbing the growing calm. Miss Brooks listened carefully. "I wonder who's playing?" The ferryman smiled. "Probably young Samuel Reed, the blacksmith's son, the very one. I heard he's become quite talented. He practices every evening once the forge cools." The postmistress nodded. "Music travels wonderfully across water." "It always has." The ferry continued gliding through the glowing reflections while the gentle melody slowly faded behind them. A pair of river turtles rested together upon a half-submerged log, warming themselves in the final sunlight of the day. As the ferry drifted closer, one quietly slipped beneath the surface. The second waited a moment longer before following. Tiny circles spread gently across the calm water until they disappeared completely. The ferryman watched with quiet appreciation. Even after decades upon the Mississippi, small moments like these never lost their charm. Nature rarely hurried. Perhaps that was one reason life beside the river felt so peaceful. The river taught patience every single day. At last, the western landing came into view. A lantern already hung outside the small waiting shelter, though it had not yet been lit. Nearby, the familiar split-rail fence cast long evening shadows across the grass, while crickets had begun their nightly chorus beneath the tall reeds. The ferry touched the dock with little more than a gentle whisper against the weathered timbers. The ferryman secured the rope with practiced hands. Mrs. Turner carefully lifted the 2 canvas mailbags. Until Monday, safe travels. Miss Brooks gathered her lesson books before gently patting her faithful mare. Have a peaceful evening, and you as well. One by one, they continued along the quiet country road, disappearing beneath the warm glow of the approaching sunset. The ferryman remained at the landing for another peaceful moment, watching the last rays of sunlight rest upon the broad Mississippi. The day's work was not yet finished, but the river was already preparing for its favorite hour, the calm, lantern-lit crossings that belong to twilight. Lantern light upon the Mississippi. The final glow of sunset lingered only briefly before surrendering to the gentle colors of evening. Above the western bluffs, the brilliant gold slowly softened into warm shades of rose and lavender, while farther overhead the first deep blues of approaching night quietly spread across the vast American sky. The ferryman remained beside the landing for another peaceful moment. Twilight had always been his favorite hour. It was neither fully day nor completely night. Instead, it offered a quiet pause between the two, when both the river and the countryside seemed to breathe a little more slowly. A cool breeze drifted across the Mississippi, carrying with it the comforting scent of damp river reeds, fresh-cut hay from distant fields, and faint wood smoke curling upward from dozens of farmhouse chimneys. Supper was being prepared throughout the valley. The aromas traveled surprisingly far over open water. He stepped inside the small waiting shelter and reached for a familiar object resting upon its wooden shelf. An old brass lantern. Its polished surface had grown slightly dull over the years, but careful hands had always kept it clean and dependable. He opened the small glass door before trimming the cotton wick with practiced fingers. From his waistcoat pocket he removed a box of wooden matches. One gentle strike, a quiet hiss, then a small amber flame came to life. He adjusted the wick carefully until the light glowed steadily behind the crystal-clear glass. The lantern never shone brightly enough to overpower the darkness. It did something gentler. It welcomed people home. Carrying it by its curved brass handle, he walked toward the ferry and carefully hung it from its familiar iron hook near the center railing. Soon its warm circle of light reflected softly across the polished wooden deck, while tiny golden ripples danced upon the water below. Almost immediately another traveler appeared along the eastern road. It was Dr. Nathaniel Harper. The country physician guided his sturdy chestnut horse toward the landing at an unhurried pace. A worn black leather medical bag rested securely across the saddle, its brass buckles catching the fading light. The ferryman smiled. "Good evening, Doctor. And to you, busy day?" Dr. Harper removed his hat and brushed a little dust from the brim. 3 house calls, a broken wrist, 1 new baby, and an elderly farmer whose rheumatism predicts tomorrow's weather better than any newspaper. The ferryman laughed quietly. "Did he offer a forecast?" "He says we'll have clear skies." He rarely misses. The doctor carefully led his horse aboard before resting both hands upon the railing as the ferry drifted gently into the current. The lantern swayed almost imperceptibly overhead. Its warm glow painted soft reflections across every weathered plank. Neither man hurried to fill the silence. Years of friendship had taught them that comfortable quiet often spoke more honestly than unnecessary conversation. Above them, the first evening star appeared in the darkening sky. Soon another followed, then another. The Mississippi mirrored them all with remarkable patience, tiny points of light shimmering gently whenever the current disturbed the surface. The doctor looked upward. "I've always liked this hour. So have I. It reminds me that no matter how difficult the day has been, evening always arrives quietly." The ferryman nodded. "The river understands that." For countless generations, people had watched these same stars appear above the Mississippi. Native families long before American settlements, French voyageurs paddling heavy canoes, early trappers, river merchants, farmers, soldiers, children lying upon grassy hillsides. Entire lifetimes had passed beneath this familiar evening sky, yet the stars remained faithful companions. The ferry glided onward almost effortlessly. Near the northern shoreline, frogs had begun their nightly chorus among the reeds, their gentle calls blending naturally with the chirping of crickets hidden beneath tall prairie grasses. Somewhere deeper within the forest, an owl announced its presence with one calm, echoing call before silence gently settled once again. The doctor rested one hand upon his medical bag. "I visited Mrs. Wilson today." The ferryman smiled knowingly. "The widow near Cottonwood Creek?" "The very one. How is she?" "Quite well. She insisted on giving me a loaf of fresh bread before I left." "Did you accept?" "I learned years ago that refusing would only offend her." The ferryman chuckled softly. "She has always believed kindness should travel home with every visitor. I suspect she's right." Neither man mentioned money. Along the frontier, neighbors often exchanged generosity as naturally as goods. A basket of apples, fresh eggs, homemade butter, a repaired fence, firewood stacked before winter. Payment sometimes arrived in the form of gratitude rather than coins. The doctor quietly continued. "Her grandson helped carry water from the well. Couldn't have been older than 7. He told me he wants to become a doctor someday." "What did you tell him?" "I said the world always needs another good pair of healing hands." The ferryman smiled warmly. "And perhaps one day he'll be crossing this very ferry to visit his own patients." "I hope so." The thought lingered pleasantly between them. Across the broad river, a small flock of ducks skimmed low above the water before settling gently into a sheltered cove. Their wings barely disturbed the smooth surface, leaving only widening rings that slowly disappeared beneath the lantern's golden reflection. The eastern landing gradually came into view. A young couple waited patiently beside a modest wagon loaded with baskets covered in white linen cloths. Judging by the sweet scent drifting through the evening air, they had likely spent the day selling peaches and late summer vegetables at the town market. The horse recognized the familiar landing before anyone spoke, slowing naturally as the ferry approached. The thick hemp rope tightened against the dock with its familiar wooden creak. The doctor gathered his reins before turning once more toward the ferryman. "Thank you for the crossing? For keeping this place exactly as it ought to be." The ferryman looked quietly across the peaceful river. "I've simply tried not to hurry it." The doctor smiled. "Perhaps that's why people enjoy coming here." With a friendly wave, he guided his horse onto the shore and disappeared along the lantern-lit road, where fireflies had already begun floating above the tall grass like tiny wandering stars. The ferryman remained standing upon the deck for another peaceful moment. The lantern continued its gentle glow. The river whispered softly against the wooden hull. Above him, more stars appeared with every passing minute. Night was no longer approaching. It had quietly arrived, And still, the Mississippi carried ordinary people safely home beneath its endless, star-filled sky. Piath River beneath the stars. Night settled completely over the Mississippi with a calmness that could never be hurried. The last traces of sunset had long faded beyond the western hills, leaving behind an immense velvet sky sprinkled with countless stars. Above the quiet valley, the familiar ribbon of the Milky Way slowly revealed itself, stretching from one horizon to the other like a pale river flowing silently across the heavens. The ferryman stood alone beside the lantern. Its amber light shimmered gently against the polished brass frame, casting a warm circle across the wooden deck while the river beyond remained wrapped in soft silver moonlight. The Mississippi had become another world. During the day it reflected busy skies, passing wagons, and working lives. At night it reflected eternity. The current moved almost invisibly beneath the ferry, carrying tiny fragments of moonlight downstream. Only the occasional swirl around a hidden log reminded him that even in perfect stillness, the river never truly stopped moving. He listened. Crickets continued their patient evening chorus from the grassy banks. Tree frogs answered from the marshes farther inland. Somewhere upstream, a barred owl called softly from the branches of an old cottonwood before silence gently returned. These sounds had accompanied nearly every evening of his working life. He could no longer imagine the river without them. From the eastern road came the quiet rhythm of approaching hoofbeats, not hurried, not weary, simply steady. A lone rider emerged beneath the moonlight. It was Reverend Samuel Whitaker, the minister from the small white church overlooking the nearby valley. His black coat rested neatly across the saddle behind him, replaced now by a comfortable wool vest better suited for traveling after evening services. A worn leather Bible rested securely inside one of his saddlebags. The ferryman smiled. "You're out later than usual." The minister returned the smile. "The choir practiced longer than expected. Worth the extra time?" "I believe so." He gently guided his horse aboard before removing his hat. "The children are learning the old hymns surprisingly quickly." The ferry eased away from the landing with scarcely a sound. The lantern swayed gently above them. For several moments neither man spoke. They watched the moonlight drift across the broad river. Finally, the minister quietly observed, "I've often thought this crossing feels a little like prayer." The ferryman looked thoughtfully toward the water. "In what way? It asks nothing. It simply invites you to be still." The ferryman considered those words while the current carried them toward midstream. Perhaps that explained why so many travelers stepped aboard burdened with the worries of the day, but stepped ashore feeling somehow lighter. The river gave people permission to pause. There was nowhere else they needed to be for a few peaceful minutes. No fields to plow, no accounts to settle, no letters to answer. Only water, sky, and silence. Above them, the moon climbed a little higher. Its pale light transformed the distant bluffs into soft blue silhouettes, while every ripple upon the river caught flashes of silver that seemed almost alive. The minister pointed quietly toward the northern bank. "Do you see them?" A family of white-tailed deer had emerged from the trees. A graceful doe stepped carefully to the water's edge, followed by two spotted fawns scarcely taller than the reeds surrounding them. They lowered their heads to drink before lifting them again, ears turning gently toward every small sound carried across the valley. The ferryman smiled. "They've been visiting this shoreline all summer. They seem unafraid." "I think they've learned that people crossing the river rarely disturb them." For another minute the deer remained perfectly still. Then, with remarkable grace, they disappeared once more beneath the shadows of the forest. The minister watched them go. "It amazes me how quietly nature moves." The ferryman nodded. "The loudest things are usually made by people." Both men laughed softly. Their voices drifted away almost immediately into the open night. As they reached the deepest part of the channel, the minister rested both forearms upon the railing. My father used to tell me something whenever we crossed rivers together. What was that? He'd say, "Never rush a crossing." The ferryman looked toward the moonlit current. Wise advice. I didn't understand it when I was a boy. And now? Now I think he meant much more than rivers. The ferryman understood immediately. Life itself offered many crossings. Childhood into adulthood, spring into harvest, joy into sorrow, work into rest. Every season arrived in its own proper time. None could be hurried without losing something precious along the way. The Mississippi had taught that lesson countless times. Floodwaters eventually receded, ice eventually melted, mist eventually lifted. Morning always followed night. Patience belonged to the river. Perhaps it should belong to people as well. The eastern landing slowly emerged ahead, its small lantern glowing warmly beneath the shelter roof. Fireflies floated lazily above the tall grasses nearby, rising and falling like tiny living embers scattered across the meadow. The ferry touched the dock with barely a whisper. The ferryman secured the familiar rope before helping steady the minister's horse as it stepped ashore. The Reverend paused before leaving. "I imagine you've carried thousands of people across this river. I've stopped trying to count. I wonder how many remember your kindness." The ferryman smiled gently. "I hope they remember arriving safely. I suspect they'll remember both." With a grateful nod, the minister adjusted his saddlebags and disappeared slowly along the moonlit road where the white church steeple stood quietly against the stars in the distance. The ferryman remained alone once more. He leaned lightly against the weathered railing, allowing himself another peaceful moment before the next crossing. Far downstream, the soft whistle of a passing steamboat echoed through the valley. It sounded distant now, gentle, almost dreamlike. Its reflection flickered briefly upon the water before disappearing around a bend hidden by darkness. The Mississippi returned to silence. Above, the stars continued their endless journey. Below, the great river continued its own. Between them floated one humble ferry, carrying ordinary lives through another quiet evening exactly as it had for so many years. The ferryman reached for the lantern, trimmed its wick ever so slightly, and watched its steady glow brighten once more. There would likely be one or two final travelers before the night truly belonged to the river alone, and he intended to greet each of them with the same calm welcome that had become the quiet rhythm of his life. The last crossing before midnight. The evening deepened with remarkable gentleness, as though the Mississippi itself wished to ease every living thing toward rest. Above the broad river, countless stars now glittered with quiet certainty, their reflections drifting beside the ferry like scattered lanterns carried upon invisible currents. The moon had climbed higher into the southern sky, bathing the wooded banks in soft silver light that blurred every sharp edge into peaceful silhouettes. The ferryman rested one hand upon the familiar railing. Its smooth oak surface had been polished by thousands of hands over the years. Travelers, farmers, children, merchants, mothers carrying sleeping infants, young couples beginning new chapters of life, old friends returning home. Each had briefly shared this small floating platform before continuing along their own separate paths. The ferry remembered none of their names, yet somehow it remembered them all. A cool breeze drifted quietly across the water. The scent of river mud mixed gently with wild mint growing near the shoreline, while nearby cottonwood leaves whispered softly above the landing. Somewhere downstream, a fish broke the smooth surface with a gentle splash before disappearing once more beneath the dark water. The ferryman smiled. Even the fish seemed quieter after sunset. He glanced toward the western road. A single lantern approached slowly through the darkness. Its warm light bobbed gently with every step of the sturdy mule pulling a small wooden wagon. Soon the familiar face of Mrs. Eleanor Brooks came into view. She visited town nearly every Thursday to sell jars of homemade preserves, fresh butter, and woven baskets crafted during long winter evenings. Tonight only a few empty baskets remained inside her wagon. Business had clearly been good. "Good evening, Mrs. Brooks, and a fine evening it is." She climbed carefully from the wagon before patting the mule affectionately along its neck. "He worked hard today. So did you." She laughed softly. "I suppose we both earned a little sleep." Together they guided the wagon onto the ferry. The mule stepped aboard confidently, having crossed this stretch of river more times than either of them could remember. Animals often trusted routines more quickly than people. The ferryman untied the mooring rope. With one practiced push of the long setting pole, the ferry drifted smoothly away from shore. The only sound came from water brushing gently against the weathered hull. Mrs. Brooks leaned comfortably against the railing. "I sold every jar of blackberry preserves. I suspected you might. The school teacher bought 6? Preparing for winter already?" So she said. The ferryman nodded approvingly. People along the Mississippi understood the importance of preparing long before the first snowfall appeared. Cellars gradually filled with canned vegetables. Smokehouses stored cured meat. Pantries welcomed dried beans, apples, and sacks of flour. Winter rewarded those who planned patiently through warmer seasons. Mrs. Brooks reached beneath the wagon seat. "I almost forgot." She removed a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "My granddaughter insisted you should have this." The ferryman accepted it carefully. Inside rested 2 thick oatmeal cookies sprinkled generously with cinnamon. Still slightly warm, he smiled. "Please thank her for me. I already did. But she'll be happier hearing that you enjoyed them." He broke off a small piece. The buttery sweetness blended perfectly with the cool evening air. "She'll become an excellent baker," Mrs. Brooks smiled proudly. "I believe so." For several peaceful moments they watched the moonlight dancing across the broad river. The silence between them felt comfortable. Neither hurried to interrupt it. At length Mrs. Brooks spoke again. "My grandson asked me yesterday how many people you've carried across this river." The ferryman chuckled. "What answer did you give?" "I told him probably enough to fill every pew in every church between here and St. Louis." He laughed warmly. "That may not be far from the truth." She looked thoughtfully across the water. He asked another question. "Oh, he wanted to know whether you ever become lonely." The ferryman considered his answer before speaking. "Sometimes, but never for very long. The river keeps good company." Mrs. Brooks nodded slowly. "I understand. Some people found comfort in crowded towns. Others discovered it beside quiet water. Neither way was better. Each heart simply recognized its own peaceful place." Ahead, the eastern shoreline appeared beneath the moonlight. The outline of a white farmhouse stood quietly beyond an open meadow where fireflies floated lazily among tall grasses. Its windows glowed with warm lamplight. Some family was finishing supper. Perhaps someone was reading aloud beside the fireplace. Perhaps children were already asleep beneath handmade quilts stitched during long winters. Simple moments. Ordinary lives. Yet together they formed the quiet heartbeat of rural America. The ferry touched gently against the landing. The familiar hemp rope tightened with a soft groan. Mrs. Brooks climbed back onto the wagon. Before taking the reins, she looked once more toward the ferryman. "You know, every crossing feels exactly the same," he smiled. "I hope that's a compliment. It certainly is." In a changing world, it's comforting when some things remain dependable. He tipped his cap. "I'll do my best to keep it that way." The mule started forward. The wagon wheels rolled slowly along the moonlit road before gradually disappearing among the trees. The ferryman remained at the landing. For a while, no one came. No lanterns appeared. No wagons approached. The valley settled into a peaceful stillness, broken only by the quiet rhythm of insects singing beneath the grass. He unfolded the cloth once more and finished the second oatmeal cookie while leaning comfortably against the dock post. Its cinnamon reminded him of autumn, harvest festivals, apple orchards, fresh pies cooling upon farmhouse windowsills. How many seasons had passed since he first stood here as a young man? He no longer counted. The years seemed less important than the crossings themselves. Each day had quietly resembled the one before, yet no two had ever been exactly alike. Different travelers, different conversations, different skies, different seasons. The river never repeated itself completely. Neither did life. Far overhead, a shooting star crossed the heavens in complete silence before vanishing beyond the eastern hills. The ferryman watched its brief journey without making a wish. He already possessed something many people spent their entire lives searching for: meaningful work, a peaceful home, good neighbors, and a place where each morning and evening arrived with quiet purpose. He reached for the lantern hanging beside the ferry, gently polishing one corner of its glass with a folded handkerchief until the warm flame shone clearly once again. There would be one final crossing before he secured the ferry for the night. Somewhere beyond the quiet darkness, another traveler was making their unhurried way toward the landing, trusting that the familiar ferryman would still be waiting beneath the lantern's steady glow. Closing the ferry for the night, the final hour before midnight carried a special kind of quiet known only to those who worked beneath open skies. The bustle of the day had long faded, and even the gentle conversations of evening travelers had become memories drifting downstream with the current. Above the Mississippi, the stars shone with remarkable clarity, each reflected upon the smooth water, until it became difficult to tell where the heavens ended and the river began. The ferryman stood beside the landing with one hand resting lightly upon the weathered mooring post. Its worn wood felt as familiar as an old friend's handshake. How many evenings had ended exactly here? Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Yet each one still offered something new to notice. A different breeze, a different arrangement of stars, a different bird calling from the darkness. The river never stopped teaching those willing to pay attention. Far across the eastern fields, a faint lantern slowly appeared along the winding road. Its glow moved steadily but without haste. The ferryman smiled quietly. There was still one final traveler. As the light drew closer, he recognized the familiar figure of Dr. Nathaniel Carter, the country physician whose rounds often carried him across both sides of the Mississippi. His sturdy bay horse walked with patient confidence despite the late hour, while a well-used black leather medical bag rested securely behind the saddle. The doctor removed his hat as he approached. "I hope I'm not keeping you awake." The ferryman chuckled softly. "The river decides when the day's finished, not the clock." The physician smiled. "I've just come from welcoming a new life into the world. A healthy child? A healthy little girl. Then this has been a very good day." "It certainly has." Together they led the horse carefully onto the ferry. The animal lowered its head contentedly, as though it had memorized every board beneath its hooves over many years of faithful crossings. The ferryman loosened the heavy hemp rope. The ferry drifted gently away from shore. No voices disturbed the quiet water. Only the slow creak of timber accompanied the soft movement of the current beneath them. For several peaceful moments, both men simply admired the moonlit river. Finally, the doctor spoke. "I've often wondered something." "Oh? Do you ever grow tired of seeing the same river every day?" The ferryman looked thoughtfully across the broad expanse of water. "I've never seen the same river twice." The doctor smiled with quiet understanding. "Because it changes, and because I do." Every season transformed the Mississippi. Spring floods, summer reflections, autumn leaves floating gently downstream, winter ice drifting silently along the edges. Yet the ferryman realized something else had changed over the years, his own eyes. As a young man, he noticed only the work. Now he noticed beauty hidden inside ordinary moments. The flight of a great blue heron, morning mist rising from warm water, the patient rhythm of rain upon the deck. Age had not narrowed his world, it had quietly deepened it. The doctor rested one elbow upon the railing. "I met a little boy today who asked whether rivers ever become old." The ferryman smiled. "What did you tell him?" "I said rivers stay young because they never stop moving." The ferryman nodded. "A fine answer. But afterward I wondered if people might remain young the same way. By continuing to move forward? Perhaps. Or perhaps by continuing to notice small things." The doctor considered that thought while watching moonlight shimmer across the gentle current. "I think you're right." Nearby, a family of ducks glided silently through a patch of silver reflections. The tiny ducklings remained tucked closely behind their mother, leaving delicate V-shaped ripples that slowly disappeared into darkness. Neither man spoke. Some sights deserved only quiet appreciation. Halfway across the river, the ferryman glanced upward. The familiar constellation Orion had begun rising above the eastern horizon, announcing that another season was gradually approaching. Winter remained many weeks away. Still, the stars had already begun preparing for it. Nature always moved patiently, never suddenly, never carelessly. The doctor noticed him watching the sky. "You know your stars well. The river taught me." "I learned medicine from books. I learned direction from the heavens." Each profession depended upon careful observation. The doctor watched breathing. The ferryman watched currents. One studied the heartbeat. The other studied the flow of water. Both understood that the smallest details often mattered most. Soon the opposite shoreline appeared beneath the moonlight. The ferry eased gently against the landing. The familiar rope tightened. The crossing was complete. The doctor gathered his medical bag before turning once more toward the ferryman. "I've crossed with you for nearly 20 years. It has been my pleasure. I've never once worried about reaching the other side." The ferryman tipped his cap modestly. "That's the finest compliment a ferryman could receive." The doctor extended his hand. The two men shook hands firmly. No elaborate words were needed. Respect built slowly over many years required little explanation. The physician mounted his horse and continued quietly along the moonlit road until both rider and lantern gradually disappeared among the trees. Once again, silence settled over the landing. The ferryman stood alone beneath the warm glow of his lantern. He listened carefully. No distant wagon wheels, no approaching hoofbeats, no voices carried across the valley, only crickets, the soft murmur of flowing water, and the gentle whisper of leaves stirring overhead. The day's work had finally come to an end. He untied the lantern from its hook and walked slowly across the empty ferry one final time. Every rope was checked, every cleat secured, the gangplank carefully raised. Years of habit required no thought. His hands simply remembered. He paused in the middle of the deck before lowering the lantern slightly. The golden light spread across the weathered planks where countless travelers had stood throughout the years. Children beginning school, young couples starting married life, farmers carrying harvests, veterans returning home, grandparents visiting family, ordinary people living ordinary lives. For a little while, all of them had shared this quiet floating bridge between two shores. The ferryman smiled softly into the peaceful darkness. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another mist drifting over the Mississippi, another collection of familiar faces and unexpected strangers. But for now, the great river asked for nothing more than silence, moonlight, and rest. He lifted the lantern, turned toward the narrow path leading home and began walking slowly beneath the towering cottonwoods, leaving the faithful ferry rocking ever so gently against its moorings as the Mississippi continued its timeless journey beneath the endless stars. A peaceful good night beside the Mississippi. The narrow footpath home felt especially peaceful beneath the gentle light of the moon. Each familiar step carried the ferryman away from the landing and toward the little cabin that had quietly welcomed him after countless days upon the Mississippi. The towering cottonwoods stood like faithful old guardians, their silver leaves shimmering softly whenever the night breeze wandered through their branches. Behind him, the ferry rocked almost imperceptibly against its mooring posts. The thick hemp ropes held firm. The broad river flowed onward without hurry, just as it had long before the first settlers built a crossing here, and just as it would long after future generations found new ways to travel from shore to shore. Some things changed, some things endured. The ferryman had learned to appreciate both. A chorus of crickets filled the cool summer air. From somewhere deep within the woods, a barred owl called quietly. Its familiar voice echoed once across the valley before fading gently into the distance. He smiled. The owl had greeted him on many evenings over the years. Perhaps not always the same bird, yet always the same comforting sound. As he reached the edge of his small garden, the scent of late-blooming honeysuckle drifted through the air. Tiny white blossoms climbed the weathered fence, glowing softly beneath the moonlight while moths floated lazily from flower to flower. His cabin appeared ahead. Warm, simple, peaceful. Golden light still glowed from the front window where the small oil lamp continued burning patiently upon the table. He stepped onto the creaking wooden porch and removed his boots before opening the familiar door. Inside, the room welcomed him with quiet comfort. The stone fireplace held only glowing embers now, giving off a gentle warmth that lingered from the evening fire. Shadows danced softly across the pine walls while the old rocking chair rested beside the hearth exactly where he had left it before dawn. Nothing inside the cabin seemed eager to change. He appreciated that. The ferryman carefully hung his hat upon the same wooden peg it had occupied for years. Next came his weathered coat, then his leather satchel. Every object had its place. Simple routines quietly turned an ordinary house into a home. He poured a small cup of cool well water from the stoneware crock resting near the kitchen table. The water tasted wonderfully fresh after a long day outdoors. There was no need for anything more elaborate. Sometimes the simplest comforts were the sweetest. Before preparing for bed, he walked to the bookshelf standing beside the window. Only a modest collection of volumes rested there. A family Bible, a well-used almanac, several books of American poetry, a few histories of the Mississippi Valley, and one small journal whose leather cover had softened with age. He opened it carefully. Each evening he added only a few lines. Never lengthy stories, only quiet observations. Tonight he dipped his pen into the ink bottle and wrote with slow, careful handwriting. River calm all day. Mrs. Brooks sold every jar. Dr. Carter welcomed a baby girl. The sandbar north of Miller's Bend grows larger. The moon reflected beautifully after sunset. He paused for a moment before adding one final sentence. Another good day upon the river. He closed the journal gently. Future generations might never read those simple pages. That hardly mattered. Some memories were written not to impress others, but simply to honor ordinary days before they quietly slipped away. The oil lamp flickered softly. Outside, the steady murmur of the Mississippi drifted through the open window. Even from this distance, he could always hear the river. It had become part of the rhythm of his own life. He wondered briefly how many crossings tomorrow might bring. Perhaps farmers carrying vegetables to market. Perhaps children visiting grandparents. perhaps traveling musicians, perhaps someone beginning an entirely new chapter of life on the opposite shore. Every traveler arrived with a story already unfolding. The ferryman simply helped them continue it. He never considered himself the hero of those stories, only a trusted guide for one small portion of the journey. That thought always brought him quiet satisfaction. He extinguished the lamp. The room settled into peaceful darkness, lit only by pale moonlight spilling gently across the wooden floor. Through the window, the stars remained scattered above the valley with the same quiet beauty that countless generations before him had admired. He lay beneath his handmade quilt, listening once more to the sounds that had accompanied nearly every night of his life. Crickets, a distant owl, leaves stirring softly, and beneath them all, the endless song of the Mississippi. The great river asked for nothing. It simply flowed, patiently, faithfully, season after season, year after year, generation after generation. Long after the last ferry would someday make its final crossing, long after bridges carried travelers where wooden boats once drifted, the Mississippi would continue its timeless journey toward the Gulf, carrying moonlight, memories, and reflections together upon its broad and gentle current. Perhaps that is why so many people loved the river, not because it stood still, but because it reminded them that life could continue moving forward without ever losing its quiet grace. And now, dear friend, as the stars keep watch above the peaceful waters and the old ferry rests safely beside its familiar landing, it is time for us to leave this gentle corner of 1885 America as quietly as we arrived. May the calm rhythm of the Mississippi remain with you. May its steady current carry away the noise of the day. And may you drift into a deep and restful sleep, knowing that somewhere beneath the moonlight, an old ferryman has finished his final crossing, secured his faithful ferry, and wished every traveler a safe journey home. The final chapter concludes with the ferryman securing his boat after the day's last crossing. As the river flows quietly beneath the stars and distant frogs begin their evening chorus, the narration gently reflects on how countless ordinary people quietly connected entire communities long before modern bridges existed. The story fades into the timeless sound of flowing water, leaving the listener with a profound sense of peace and gentle wonder. Good night, dear friend.